Helena, it's such a pleasure to see you again and have you again on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo. It's a real pleasure to be here with you again.
So, you are a psychologist, a speaker, and an educator, focusing on the latest scientific developments in the fields of psychology, neuroscience, and human behavior. You have specialized in applied neuroscience at work, and you have published a fantastic, I must say, book, Why We Do What We Do. It's here. And before we start discussing the three topics related to our brain today, would you like to share with our audience some of your background and, in particular, what brought you here? Why do you do what you do? I mean,
Why I do what I do? Why do I do what I do? Well, it's a big question, and I've always been fascinated in human behavior. I'm the eldest of 10 children, and I've always been fascinated in how we respond to each other, how we get things done through each other. And I really, having been interested in science all the way through my school days, I didn't do science as a first degree, and then did a Latin degree, and then decided that I was going to move more into the world of psychology. But what I was finding while I was working was that I had so many unanswered questions about human behavior, why feedback systems didn't work properly, why people were struggling to motivate each other. And so I entered the world of psychology and then neuroscience, really to find answers to questions that I could then bring back to the organizational context. So I use the latest findings and discoveries in neuroscience and psychology and behavioral science to help busy people find out more about themselves, but also to get the best out of themselves at work and the people that they lead or that they work with around them. So I always try and give it a so what, a relevance to what they do. So it doesn't stand alone as a very interesting but theoretical framework. It's actually contextualized and embedded in the organizational world.
that's very interesting. And, the title of this podcast is Lux and Friends. And Lux, the luxury industry, the luxury world, has always had a very relevant psychological, or if you will, emotional side. It's all about perception in the end. Yes, those products, those services are extraordinary, but they're only extraordinary as much as consumers, clients see them as extraordinary. What's your experience with luxury? What, based on your study, drives people towards luxury?
Oh, that's a great question. It's a really big question. What I know about when we buy anything, any buying decision or purchasing decision comes with it that there's always an element of expectation that comes with that decision. So when we buy anything that has perceived value to us, this expectation then drives what we get out of it. So, for example, in the world of pharmaceuticals, a branded drug has been reported to show fewer side effects than a generic drug because people's expectations work a bit like a placebo effect. And placebo in Latin means I will please. But equally, we can have the nocebo effect, which is in Latin, I will harm. So if people expect to get side effects and are told they're going to get side effects, they have a higher likelihood of getting those side effects. And with brands, with luxury brands, it's very similar. There was a really interesting study that was done with Ray-Bans, and people were put under a bright light and given a series of cognitive tests. And some of the group, so half the group were given Ray-Bans and were told they were wearing Ray-Bans, and the other group were just given good sunglasses, but not Ray-Bans. And the people who were wearing Ray-Bans actually completed the task in the fastest time and also made fewer mistakes. So I think luxury carries with it an expectation. And then because of how the brain is, that expectation then becomes reality. And so we attach significance to something that we're buying when we perceive it to be a luxury good. Equally, if people pay a lot of money for a holiday, a luxury holiday, they're less likely to complain because they're the eyes open in a way, and they see probably fewer problems, fewer issues than if they'd bought a bargain holiday. So our eyes are simply there to take in information, but the brain does the seeing, and the brain then attaches significance and meaning to everything. So we get what we expect to get, and we see what we expect to see.
So in a way, this is making our lives easier.
In a way, it's also, we don't often question this. And I think the big thing about learning about the brain is learning to question what we see, because if our expectations are always driving to a greater or lesser extent the result, then sometimes we become blind to other possibilities. So this is why we need people around us who disagree with us, who see the world differently, because they open up our eyes to a different reality, a different set of expectations. So, sometimes, yes, it is, it's nice to think that we're going to get the thing that we want when we expect, when we buy something. But at the same time, we have to be very aware that our view is always going to be a limited view. Our reality is always going to be subjective.
I find this so fascinating, Helena, because I understand the importance of disagreement, of seeing things from different perspectives. However, I also reckon that managing disagreement is not easy.
No, and there's a big reason for that, which is that the brain. So one of the leading theories of the brain is that it's a predictive instrument. It's a guessing machine, and it has to receive sensory input and then tell us quickly what to do with that sensory input. So it has to make rapid predictions based on what it thinks it knows. And one of the best ways to describe this is to imagine you're thirsty, you'll drink some water, and then quickly you feel that your thirst has been quenched, but actually it hasn't really been quenched because it takes about 20 minutes for the water to reach your tissues. But the neurons the neurons can detect cold water, particularly cold water, the temperature. They're very temperature sensitive, some of our neurons, and they say, great, we've got some water coming in, you can get on with your life. So they'll tell us quickly that we're okay, we can move on. So this predictive element is always there, and it's an important thing to recognize, because we then have to be able to assess what's predictable and assess what's safe. But the brain is very sensitive to what's potentially dangerous. So if it can't predict quickly and something different to what the brain is expecting, poses a potential threat. And this is why the brain naturally doesn't gravitate towards anything different to us, because it can't predict it easily. So promoting and creating a diverse environment is actually quite challenging for the brain, because it's unpredictable. By its nature, it's unpredictable. And so we have to get the brain to push its own boundaries. And this is difficult. This is why we have to have initiatives that actually encourage this, because it's not something that naturally comes easy.
Wow, but in terms of group dynamics, what behaviors should we have in order to not make disagreement turn into arguments?
Well, that's a really difficult one, because when people naturally disagree with each other, it's a very short distance between, minor disagreement to major disagreement. And we're living in a world now where emotions have become heightened. The pandemic hasn't helped human behavior in many respects. We're very sensitive to potential threat. We're very sensitive to each other at the moment, because we've been away from each other. We've been socially distanced. And it's a very difficult thing to encourage healthy debate. We talk about encouraging healthy debate, but recognizing too that could turn into something a little bit more serious or a little bit more destructive. And that's really the job of a leader, is to try and manage this so that we get the best out of difference in the room, but at the same time, we don't allow it to turn into anything personal, really threatening, the feeling of danger among the group. And this is a very difficult balance to strike. And I don't think there are easy answers to this. I think it really depends on the group, the psychological safety of the group, anyway, how well the group know each other, whether the group have actually worked together through issues in the past. A lot of that all comes into play. If it's a brand new group, a lot of work has to be done to begin with to get the group to feel safe enough with each other to be able to disagree with each other. And that is what psychological safety is. It's not about comfort in the room, it's about allowing for discomfort in the room in a safe way.
That's interesting. And one of the topics we wanted to discuss together when we made the arrangements for this interview was how to not only make sense, but kind of preserve our sanity from the overwhelming information that comes from all over the place. Especially in this very moment in time where to say we live turbulent times would be an understatement. But from a neuroscientific point of view, how can we manage all the information coming to us? What shall we do?
Oh, well, I mean, that is, again, it's a difficult thing to get our heads around because we're living in a world, even pre-COVID, we were living in a world where we were being increasingly bombarded by so much information. You know, we're never off. We haven't allowed our brains to switch off for years. We take our phones to bed with us. The first thing that we look at in the morning, we are constantly on. And this continuous reactivity stops us from thinking, from reflecting, from pausing, which we absolutely need to do, because we're placing a lot of demand on neural resources that quite simply we don't have the brain power to deal with. So the neural resources we are expecting to deal with everything, they're very limited and they get very tired and they get very hungry, especially around this area here, which is a new part of the brain, very clever part of the brain. It's our executive functioning, but it's also the area of the brain that is, it's an energy hog. So it takes a lot of energy and then it needs a bit of a reboot. So to deal with all of this is a tricky thing to do. And so we also have to remember that in times of extreme uncertainty and people worrying and you know, mental illness has been on the rise for years. It's now massively on the rise. Resources are then being taken away from our thinking capability and are diverted to an area of the brain which is much older, much more ancient, much stronger, if you like. And this is all the structures that are going on in this region here in the temporal lobe, particularly structures like the amygdala, which switches on when anything is unexpected, potentially dangerous. The hippocampal region, which stores a lot of our personal memory. And of course, then we have the hypothalamus, which is the beginning. It's the master gland, which with the pituitary gland control our endocrine release and endocrine responses. All our hormones originate from here. So these structures have been there for centuries, for much longer than our frontal lobe regions. And this is the area of the brain that's really active at the moment, very sensitive to potential stress. So in order to get the brain to think more clearly, to be able to focus, to be able to do what it can do really well if we let it, we have to learn to slow down our responses, take time away from doing. We're not very good at thinking. We need to, while we're busy doing, we're not thinking. So taking a pause, taking a breath, taking stock, giving the brain time to rest and breathe, really important things to do to get the best out of our brain. And then we can utilize the thinking capability that we have, make better decisions, pay attention to more things around us, and get the best out of ourselves.
You mentioned screens.
Yes.
I struggle with it, I must admit. I spend a lot of time in front of a screen because conferences online, meetings online. I read books on my phone or my iPad just because I find it more convenient, easier. It's with me everywhere. And I read at night sometime, and I reckon it's not good. Is there any best practice you can suggest and that I must start following?
What we also have to remember, Carlo, is that people are very different. So we all have individual differences. So what works well for one person may not work so well for others. So my answer to you would be, if what you're doing is causing you a problem, then it's time to change. So if what you're doing is affecting your sleep quality, your sleep duration, then it might be time to look at some of the habits you're using, day to day. If you're having no problem sleeping and thinking, then it's obviously fine for you. But we have to also remember that the brain hasn't adapted as quickly as we would like it to have done to the world of technology, the constant, all the digital devices that we surround ourselves with. No one's told the brain that we're living in a highly technological world, and it's still the brain of our ancestors that we're carrying around in our heads. So if people are struggling with sleep, if people are struggling to get to sleep or to stay asleep, and sleep has been one of the big casualties of the pandemic particularly, then we do need to look at the habits we take into sleep. And the blue light that's emitted from devices, blue light's a very interesting phenomenon, because when we wake up in the morning, the light in the color in morning light is a blue light, and this releases cortisol, which is one of our stress hormones, and this is called our cortisol awakening response. Now, we need cortisol to get us out of bed, so we need this blue light to come into the brain so that melatonin is switched off, and this all comes from our master clock inside the head called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And this tells us, switch off the melatonin, switch on the cortisol. We need to get you out of bed. And of course, during the course of the day, we start to build up drowsiness. The chemical adenosine builds up. This helps us feel drowsy. And this is like a sand clock that is building up during the day. We drink coffee to suppress adenosine. But, if you're not sleeping well, cut the coffee after midday, because you need this buildup of adenosine. As the light dims, and it has to dim to release melatonin, this is the starter gun for sleep. This signals to the body and the brain you're ready for sleep. And these two chemicals, melatonin and adenosine, will, if they are properly balanced in the brain, they take us into sleep. Now, blue light coming from technology is going to be a bit of a killer for melatonin, so we have to recognize that. And also, we need to have this blue light coming in the morning. So we need to have all of this very carefully worked out and balanced to help us as individuals. And some people have no problem with drinking coffee at night. Some people have a massive problem with it. So it's all the time working out what's best for you and your individual system, and then doing what's best for you. We read a lot of things about, these are the right foods to eat, these are the wrong foods to eat. Well, everyone is very different, and no one diet is the best diet. It always has to suit the individual gut. So our brains are no different, and we need to find things that suit us as individuals.
I totally agree. One has to listen to his or her own body. And as far as I'm concerned, I found over the past few years meditation to be an incredible tool. And what you said, spend time thinking. I have the luxury to manage my own time. And I have to say that every time I take time aside to think, which is not meditation, it's something different. You sit, you relax, and you start thinking about subjects in your life, things that are going on. It's unbelievable.
Yes, and we talk about eureka moments. This was Archimedes who, shouted eureka in a bath. We talk about these eureka moments as being something that just happens to us, but actually they're never out of the blue. They are the result of a brain that's been populated and fertilized, and there's so much connectivity between random ideas and concepts in the brain. And then these eureka moments surface when the brain is relaxed. This is why we'll have a great moment of inspiration in the bath, or in the bathroom, or having a walk, or just staring out of a window. This is because the brain has been allowed to breathe and allowed to to come up with things it wouldn't normally have come up with, because it gets so caught up in day-to-day activity. And this is what we need when we talk about, creating creative environments or innovative environments. We need to get people to breathe collectively, to relax collectively, have fun together, laugh together, and then they learn together. Putting people into a room and telling them to brainstorm is one of the worst things we can do, because you're putting so much pressure on a brain, and telling the brain to create is counterproductive. It just simply can't work, because a stressed brain is not a creative brain. So I always say to people, don't do brainstorming. You can choose ideas, select ideas, but it's not an idea generating environment for people.
So how do you call those meetings? How do you gather people in a room and ask them to create something together? How do you call these gatherings?
You don't, well, you actually can't say we're going to. What you do is you give them, in the work I've done across many organizations, you just give people a fun activity to do. You don't say to them, you need to be creative, because that's counterproductive. You just say to people, this is what you need to do. Here are the rules of the game, or here is the activity. And the key thing for anyone in my position, where you're educating or you're helping to facilitate learning, or you're just trying to bring people new insights, is not to take yourself too seriously. I see a lot of people, taking themselves terribly seriously and what they know, and they want to get this. And that's not great either, because if you're not relaxed about yourself, then you don't create a relaxed environment. So I always believe that a light touch, a lot of laughter is really important for learning. And even if you're dealing with a very serious and sensitive topic, there is, you can bring a lightness of touch to that, so that people feel able to relax into what they're discussing or what they're doing. Getting people to come up with things they would never normally have done. Getting people to engage in activities, very random things that actually help the brain think differently. Even though it doesn't appear at the beginning to have much relevance, it always does, because you bring that thinking ability back into the organizational environment, and then they are able to bring new insights with that new thinking ability. We do a bad job of treating people in organizations by labeling them. I see a lot of organizations now putting people through unbelievable assessment after assessment after assessment. So they come up with a category and a label and a functional fixedness. We say, you're good at this, you're not good at this. These are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. I think that's very, very dangerous, because people then believe that truth, and that's how they then perform. If we allow people to engage in self-discovery and collective self-discovery, they learn things about themselves they would never normally have learned, and they feel very good about themselves having learned it. And I would really urge organizations to move away from these continual assessments, telling people that they can do and they can't do this. I think it's a very dangerous thing to be doing to people, especially at the moment where I think we've lost our perspective about people, and we need to really treat people with extreme kindness, extreme sensitivity, and tolerance. We've lost a lot of that, and I'd like to see that come back a lot more.
That would be amazing. Yeah, the world has become a tough place to be in.
Extremely tough.
Very
Yeah.
tough. And I feel for my kids.
Yes. Yeah.
So much competitiveness and roughness. And at the beginning of COVID, everybody would say, we'll get out of it better people, but it doesn't look like.
No, I think actually, to be very honest, and it's a bit of a depressing thing to say, but I think we will have emerged worse off as a species. Our brains are bruised by what's happened. We have to treat ourselves and those around us as if we're recovering from a trauma. And what's going on in Europe at the moment is not helping, because our hearts breaking for Ukraine and also the Russian soldiers who are dying. This is something that we have to recognize, that we're just recovering from a terrible pandemic where literally anybody could have posed a threat to our lives. So we would, we became very suspicious of everybody in our world. And this, then, we were hoping, and this feeling that we were coming out of it, we then realized that the world is even more upside down than ever. So this is why I think, and social distancing has not helped us. We are designed to be a social species. Touch is a social glue. We've been denied touch. We've been unable to hug each other, and be physically close to each other. That's caused a lot of problems in being able to bond and release the chemicals associated with that. So as a result, scientists are saying we may not be able to empathize as much as we used to. So all of this will need work. We'll have to try and recover these bonds and these feelings of connection again. And we need to find ways to do that without judgment and, without criticism. And with, as I said, with sensitivity and compassion, because if we don't do that and we don't make an effort, we will all end up in a worse place.
In fact, by the way, I keep referring to your book on a regular basis. I've read it more than once, and every time I find something new and something enlightening, so to speak. And why do human beings struggle so much in admitting to be wrong? And we see what's going on in Europe now. It feels like a clash between East and West more than anything.
It's a human phenomenon, Carlo. I think the brain's job is to protect us. It's to avoid death. We have to avoid death at all costs. And it's to preserve our sense of self. Freud called this the ego. Our job, the brain's job, is to give us a sense of importance, and status is one of the important, prerequisites for the human brain. We need to feel that we have significance in our world. We have a sense of importance, and in the animal kingdom, this is incredibly important. A loss of status in the animal world can result in death. So we have to feel that we are, that we have this, we play this a significant role in our own world. And this defines, egocentric behavior. We put ourselves in the middle of our world, and then everything else is organized around us. So for the brain to adjust its self-belief is very difficult, because this self-belief is one of the things that we use to preserve our life. And it's easier for the brain to adopt a new position or a new belief than to change an existing belief. So what do we do? Well, when an existing belief that we've adhered very rigidly to all our lives, it's been a hallmark of our success, it's been part of our strength and our power. If that comes under question, even if we're presented with a shed load of evidence and data to suggest that we might have it wrong, that this belief has now passed its sell-by date, we have to change our belief, we don't take into account the evidence and the data. In fact, we're very selective about how we choose to interpret this. We'll either select the bits of the evidence that will then reinforce our own belief, even though we might know deep down that it's the wrong belief. But we'll select the bits of information that reinforce this wrong belief, or we ignore the evidence completely and we justify our behavior even more. So in that respect, we're very irrational, illogical thinkers. We are very selective in the information we choose to take in, and we do whatever we can to preserve our sense of identity and this ego that we have to, put a shell around, if you like. And it's a human thing. Getting people to change their behavior is very, very difficult. And this is why the behavioral economists have worked with governments to affect social change, not by telling people what to do, but by nudging their behavior in ways that help people feel they still have a choice in the matter, but actually they're being nudged below the level of consciousness. So they don't actually realize they're being nudged to change, but they feel that they're in control of their decision anyway. And this is the great irony of, it's a very clever way to get people to change. Some people are becoming much more switched on to it now, but we're being nudged and influenced in ways we can't possibly ever imagine. And it's happening around us day to day. And it's fascinating to see.
Indeed. Helena, I'm looking at your background and I see Venice on one side and the brain on the other. So Venice, which stands for the arts and romanticism, I guess, and the brain, science.
Yes.
But where is your heart?
Oh, well, I am, as you probably couldn't tell, I am really passionate about the brain. Brain science for me has answered so many questions. I use it to help bring clarity and certainty in as much as I can do, and answers to people who are struggling in the worlds that they operate in. So I see the impact and benefits of brain science, and I have a huge debt of gratitude to all the scientists and neuroscientists and psychologists out there that help feed my content and help me keep me in work. So a big thank you goes to them. My heart is obviously with the brain. I also adore Venice for many different reasons, because we're sensory creatures, and we live on our senses. Our sense of smell is our strongest sense. It's this feeling of engaging with the world. And when you talk about meditation, Carlo, and being aware of your environment, it's when our senses really switch on to the present. We become very connected to our present environment. And the country that really switches on my senses in a way that no other place does is Venice. It's a feast for the senses. It's a visual feast. I love the sights, the smells, the sounds of Venice. And whenever I go there, I am literally filled with joy. I love art. I work with an art historian to bring art and science together. I love learning about beauty. We have, our soul needs beauty. And I think the work you do is incredibly important. We need beauty in our lives. We need to have this feeling that we are, that we can make the world a wonderful place, a beautiful place. And we should always recognize that beauty is everywhere if we allow ourselves to see it. So giving your senses a feast and getting them to be switched on and stimulated is incredibly important. And it's a really, really, significant part of life. And I think we need to seek that as much as we can.
One last question, Helena. Can beauty save the world?
Oh, that's a lovely question. So that, yes, well, I think our striving for beauty, and I think we've got to define what we mean by beauty. But if we want to create order, if we want to organize ourselves and create some kind of, have an environment that we're happy being in, if we want to have our senses stimulated in a way that makes our souls sing, and we just think, oh, this is, it's great to be alive, then I think beauty, our striving for beauty. Now, the beauty is not perfection. There's no such thing as perfection. We like to think, we look at social media, none of that's perfection. That's just an airbrushed version of reality. But our desire, our striving to get beauty in our lives, beauty of interaction with others, beauty of relationship, beauty of surroundings, just wanting to make everything a bit better around us, and feeling very engaged and switched on with each other, with the world that we're in. I think then if we all want that, then we'll all work for it. And then we forget we forget to be so narcissistic and so self-serving, and we're always looking to help somebody else get beauty in their lives as well. I think that's a great goal to have.
Beauty is not perfection. I'll take it with me. Thank you very much for being on the show. I love this conversation.
Thank you, Carlo. Well, again, lovely to be back, and I hope very much we get to do another talk again soon.
With pleasure.